Good morning and welcome to the third day of evidence in this phase of Tranche 2. We're having a short day today and the evidence is being live streamed with a 10-minute delay. That means that anyone in the room may use any mobile electronic device that they have to transmit silently to the outside world what they have seen and heard in the inquiry, but only 10 minutes after the event being described. That is to coincide with the video stream, which is subject to a 10-minute delay. You may not use electronic devices for recording the proceedings or for taking photographs. I think we're going to begin, are we not, with evidence that is going to be summarised?
Yes, sir. Beginning with the summary of HN12's evidence.
Yes, and Mr. Saville, would you like to do that? Thank you for pointing that out. Microphones will now be, I think, in the right place, and I hope you can hear. Yes.
So HN12 is deceased. There is a restriction order prohibiting the publication of his real name. The inquiry does not have a witness statement for HN12. Instead, it will publish accounts of his deployment from meetings in the inquiry's risk assessment process and made in an application for anonymity. This summary will summarise and supplement them with details from HN12's reporting. HN12 states he joined the SDS from December 1981 and deployed in his undercover identity from April 1982 into the Revolutionary Communist Group, the RCG, and later the Socialist Workers' Party, until July 1985, when he withdrew after his deployment was compromised for a second time. He used the name Michael Hartley, based on the identity of a deceased individual. The real Michael Hartley was tragically killed at sea aged 18, and his death is recorded in the Foreign Registry of Deaths. HN12 noted the similarity of Mr. Hartley's name and age to his own, and HN12 indicated to the risk assessor that he used some true elements about the real Mr. Hartley's life in constructing his legend, noting that Mr. Hartley's father's name and separation from Mr. Hartley's mother were elements incorporated. He received instruction from the SDS office about the research for his cover name, and he believed the use of the name was, quote, according to the practice at the time, end quote. HN12 used the cover employment as a van driver for a small metalworking company in Battersea. He used a driving licence in his cover name and having obtained Mr. Hartley's birth certificate. Other documentation he had included a local library card. HN12 noted the only training he received in preparation for his deployment were the informal conversations he had with undercover officers attending weekly meetings. He described the tasking of his deployment as being to infiltrate the RCG and later the SWP to acquire details, names, addresses, and occupations of members of the RCG and supporters, to assess their total numbers, to assess their threat from public order and or the state and national security, to report the details of political actions, and to report on public and private meetings. A detailed overview of HN12's reporting is in Annex C of Counsel to the Inquiry's written opening. In short, that analysis shows that HN12 gave an overview of his first target group, the RCG, in a report from December 1982. He stated the group's purpose was, quote, opposing imperialism, primarily in Britain, but also elsewhere in all ways possible, end quote. A further report from January 1984 comments that the group's members were, quote, still active and committed to the philosophy of communism and the overthrow of British democracy, end quote. In practice, the group provided support and direction to several campaigns that HN12 identifies as fronts, end quote. The daughter organisations, the Irish Solidarity Committee, and the Stoke Newington and Hackney Defence Campaign. The RCJ meetings attributed to HN12's reporting are described as coordinating support to these smaller groups and managing recruitment. He reported on planned demonstrations by the RCG's sub-campaigns until his first compromise. Examples of this reporting include HN12's description of plans for the Irish Solidarity Committee to picket several prisons in March 1984, providing an estimate that 10 to 20 people were due to participate in each picket. Plans for the anti-apartheid movement's Central London branch in September 1982 included HN12's assessment that no disorder is planned. In another report on a planned picket outside South Africa House on the Strand, he commented that, quote, "The more strict the policing, the more opportunity the RCG will have to cause and exacerbate disorder," end quote. The Stoke Newington and Hackney Defence Campaign, SNHDC, was identified by HN12 as another RCG daughter group. He stated it intended to influence the Colin Roach Family Justice Campaign and recruit members from the black community into the RCG. In addition to attending pickets and public meetings with the group, he states lectures on communism held by the SNHDC would be supplemented with encouragement to attend other RCG campaigns. HN12 gave his conclusion that this was, quote, "an attempt to continue their indoctrination," end quote. The group was reported by HN12 to have approximately 15 to 20 regular members. He described the interactions of the group with the Roach Family Support Campaign, and in April 1983, a report described the group being deliberately disavowed by a person connected to the Roach family. He continued to follow the group's progress when he alleged that its focus had shifted to concentrate on campaigning for a group of black activists arrested as members of the Roach family's support campaign. HN12 was promoted to full membership of the RCG in September 1983. Before that date, he is recorded as speaking at meetings in connection with the Irish Solidarity Movement, and in a report dated August 1984, he is identified as having responsibility for correspondence and publicity for POWs in the campaign. On another occasion, HN12 also chaired a special meeting of the RCG in March 1983, where the RCG in London were divided into two separate entities in line with a central party directive on the subject. In January 1984, he was arrested alongside another RCG member, bill posting for the group. The next day, he attended Highbury Corner magistrates in his cover identity to enter a guilty plea. A contemporary note records Detective Inspector Short was aware of the proceedings and present in court to observe. HN12 recorded in the aid memoir for the risk assessment, quote, "that at my insistence, under orders from DCI Short, I pleaded guilty. His co-defendant also agreed to do the same. We were both fined," end quote. Both defendants are recorded as being fined £5 on that occasion. In September 1984, the focus of HN12's deployment shifted after he was compromised. He was accused by 3 senior members of the RCG of being a police informer. A contemporaneous security service memorandum records he came under suspicion for circumstantial reasons, being absent for periods from his group, and of smelling of alcohol despite his cover work as a driver. HN12 remained in his cover address and began attending meetings of the SWP's Holloway branch. He reported on public and private meetings of the SWP, including in the private homes of members. He reported on educational talks on subjects such as South African apartheid, the troubles in Northern Ireland as well. In May 1985, one address to the branch discussed the number of paper sales of the Socialist Worker and criticised sales in the Holloway branch, as just one example. He reported on individual activists, and his reports contain examples of biographic details, often including any positions of responsibility within the group and individuals' employment. HN12 also assessed and reported on the ideology of individual members. His second compromise came in June 1985, after his then-girlfriend showed to a colleague who happened also to be an SWP member, who recognised HN12, photographs of her and HN12 in his real identity on holiday together. HN12's girlfriend had on a previous occasion told her colleague that HN12 was a policeman, and there is also a suggestion that HN12 had previously met the woman in his real identity at a firework party. An SDS note for file dated July 1985 records HN12's plan to inform the SWP of his intention to leave the group, following his confrontation by one of the group's senior members. HN12 admitted to the risk assessor that he had a brief sexual liaison with an individual from the RCG. Notes from the interview on the 21st of November 2017 suggested he had 2 sexual encounters with the activist. HN12 stated it was the woman who initiated the relationship, and on the first occasion, the pair kissed before being interrupted. On the second, he suggests the pair went to her flat and had oral sex. He stated that no long-term relationship developed, and shortly after their encounters, she formed a relationship with somebody else and left the group. HN12 stated he did not plan the liaison to develop or gain intelligence. Reflecting on his time in the SDS to the inquiry, HN12 commented, quote, "Whatever I did in the SDS, I believe to have been justified and proportionate," end quote. His accounts describe the impact of his undercover deployment had on his welfare. He stated that during his deployment, he was in a relationship, and he attributes its end, quote, "because of my alcohol abuse and stress," end quote. HN12 commented on the welfare effect as such. "I strongly believe that my tour of duty in the SDS was the major factor in my life and career being damaged by periods of stress and alcohol abuse," end quote. The risk assessment aid memoir records that HN12 believed the support from his deployment was well-meaning. He suggests that there was a lack of input from experienced undercover officers and a divide between those in the field and the office. He illustrates his point with the following example. "After one weekly meeting and a drink taken, I found myself with a good friend who was sitting in my car, sobbing his heart out from stress. He felt he couldn't go to the DS, DI, or DCI because they would not understand," end quote. He experienced illness during his remaining career. The inquiry is publishing his sickness record that describes his treatment for depression and alcoholism prior to retirement. He was treated in the Metropolitan Police Nursing Home in Hendon and NHS rehab facilities and received public and private consultations during his treatment. HN12 stated that in the course of treatment, he, quote, "felt unable to speak openly about the SDS," end quote, and had felt that being unable to talk about his deployment precluded discussion on the possible causes of his alcoholism. Sir, that concludes the summary of HN12's evidence.
Yes, your summary, helpful and accurate though it is, excludes one incident of potential importance to the inquiry. On the 2nd of March 1985, 8 members of the SWP Holloway branch travelled to South Wales to donate £450 to the Miners' Strike Fund, just as the strike was ending. His report about the incident is dated the 6th of March 1985 and contains a detailed description of what occurred during the visit. And although he's not named in it, it would appear to be a report written by someone who was present.
Indeed it does, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Hudson.
Thank you, sir. So what follows is an oral summary of the deployment of HN82. HN82 is deceased, and as a result, he has not provided a witness statement to the inquiry. The only retrospective account he has provided of his deployment is a debrief with the security service immediately upon the conclusion of his deployment. So there is a restriction order prohibiting publication of HN82's real name. His cover name was Nicholas Peter Green, and he went by Nick. His cover identity was based on that of a deceased adult. His widow has stated that she went with HN82 to Edinburgh to research the cover identity and build the legend, and that she understood this to be common practice at the time. HN82 joined the STS in the second half of 1982 and had been deployed undercover by the end of August 1982. There are many reports attributed to HN82 concerning the Finsbury Park branch of the Socialist Workers' Party between the start of his deployment and September 1984. Some of his reports are of meetings in private homes. Several weeks after he was deployed, HN82's deployment is mentioned in a security service note dated the 12th of November 1982, and I quote, "Having got HN82 into Finsbury Park SWP, SDS realise that they are overcommitted to SWP at branch level," end quote. However, HN82 is said to have, quote, "reacted very unfavourably to the idea of a move," end quote. He was to continue to report on the Finsbury Park branch of the SWP until 1985. From September 1984, HN82's reporting focused on the group Red Action, founded by former SWP members, and later its connection with the coalition organisation Anti-Fascist Action. HN82 reported that those groups had an interest in physical confrontation with far-right groups. In common with many other SDS undercover officers, throughout his deployment, HN82 reported on individuals' personal details. Examples include employment, particularly employment by public bodies, physical features, addresses, and personal relationships. His reporting on the SWP includes reporting on plans for public demonstrations, including discussion of the hurling of, quote, "abuse and hopefully rotten tomatoes," end quote, when the Conservative Education Minister was due to visit a local school. HN82 also reported on a, quote, "SWP-inspired picket," end quote, outside Newbury Magistrates Court, where Greenham Common Peace Movement campaigners were due to appear, and he reported on plans to intervene and heckle during an event at which Labour MP Ted Heath was due to speak. HN82 reported on SWP involvement in industrial action, including appearance on the picket lines in support of teachers and water workers. He reported on SWP support for the miners' strike and internal discussions as to the purpose of supporting the miners' strike. Was it supported as an end in itself, or as a means to expand the reach of the SWP message and drive up its membership? According to HN82's reporting, this was an enduring debate within the SWP. HN82 reported that the general opinion within Finsbury Park SWP was that imminent revolution was unlikely, and no practical preparations were being made for its arrival. So he attended the annual Easter rally of the SWP in Skegness, Lincolnshire, on at least 2 occasions. In 1983, the booking form indicates he is Skegness organiser, although what this role entailed is unclear. He also attended in 1984 and may have reported on the rally that year. HN82 reported on anti-racist campaigning within the SWP. According to his reporting, there was a tension within the SWP about the approach to physical confrontation with members of far-right groups like the National Front. This tension led to the expulsion of some SWP members who were keen on physical confrontation, which seems to have led to the formation of Red Action. A security service note dated the 24th of September 1984 records that, quote, "SDS are proposing to move HN82 from Finsbury Park SWP into Red Action. They suggest that a new man will return the SWP coverage to 2 in 1985. It was agreed that this was a good idea," end quote. Another security service note dated the 26th of November 1984 records that HN82 is finding his move into Red Action to be, quote, slow progress, end quote, as they are, quote, careful about potential newcomers, end quote. On the 28th of January 1985, a security service note records the following, quote, HN82 is finding it hard work gaining the confidence of members of Red Action. We agreed that it is worth persevering, if only to demonstrate whether the group should or should not be taken seriously, end quote. On the 5th of March 1985, HN82 reported on a national meeting of Red Action with 17 attendees. HN82 put poor attendance down to members being more interested in the, quote, physical and social, end quote, aspects of the group's activities. In fact, HN82 reported that the next day, 40 members gathered at a pub for a demonstration in support of the miners' strike. HN82 reported that Red Action's ideology included armed overthrow of the capitalist machine and collective control of wealth. According to his reporting, Red Action expressly did not limit itself to operating within the law. He reported that Red Action lacked funding and organisation. The reporting of HN82 references violence and physical confrontation engaged in by Red Action members, but it is not clear that he witnessed or became involved in any of it himself. He reported that Red Action was supportive of Irish Republican groups. He reports that some members travelled to the anti-internment rally in Belfast in August 1985. HN82 reported on the role played by Red Action in the creation of a coalition of groups determined to confront right-wing groups directly. That coalition was named Anti-Fascist Action. The group had members from around England, and HN82 reported that within the coalition, Red Action was a group particularly keen on direct physical confrontation. Anti-Fascist Action, or AFA, planned formally to launch on Remembrance Sunday in 1985 at a rally in Victoria. HN82 reported that that location was chosen to deny the National Front their usual mustering point prior to the Remembrance Day parade. HN82 reported on internal rifts, referred to as, quote, birth pains, end quote, within the AFA, in particular involving the anarchist group Class War and the involvement of Unmesh Desai of Newer Monitoring Project and formerly, that's formerly ALLY, a Red Action member, in the struggle for dominance within the organisation. These difficulties were seemingly resolved, and HN82 reported in June 1986 that the autumn campaign of AFA was due to be, quote, the first main initiative attacking, rather than responding to, fascist groups, end quote. He reported that the autumn campaign would be, quote, the obvious yardstick, end quote, of the future potential of AFA, but his deployment ended around August 1986, before any autumn campaign. During his deployment, HN82 reported on core participants Lindsay German in her capacity as Speaker and SWP Central Committee member, and Jeremy Corbyn as a Member of Parliament and Speaker at an AFA meeting. Sir HN82 was debriefed by the Security Service at the end of his deployment. The Security Service note records that HN82 would not be replaced in Red Action. It is noted that the membership was, quote, very young, violent, and not essentially political, end quote. And in another note of the debrief, that their political and ideological base essentially focused on, quote, hard drinking and violent confrontations with the National Front, end quote. The Security Service note records gratitude to HN82 and indicates that his deployment filled a gap in its knowledge of Red Action. And so that concludes the oral summary of the deployment of HN82.
Thank you. I think I'm now going to move on to HN67.
I am indeed, thank you. Sir HN67 suffers from Parkinson's disease, and he is not fit to give a written statement or oral evidence to the inquiry. In February 2013, HN67 spoke to officers attached to Operation Hearn about his deployment, and late in 2017, a risk assessment was provided to the inquiry in support of his application for anonymity. The accounts recorded by Operation Hearn and the risk assessor form the basis of much of this oral summary. HN67 used the cover name Alan Bond, along with the nickname Bondy. This identity was based on that of a deceased child who had died abroad. After some time spent in the SDS back office, he was deployed into the Brixton branch of the Socialist Workers' Party around April 1982, and his deployment ended in November 1985. He returned to the SDS as a manager from 1991 to 1993, and so his time as a manager will be considered in Tranche 3 of the inquiry. HN67 had at least one sexual encounter during his deployment, and I will return to this in more detail later. He received no formal training for his role, but did speak to other undercover officers whilst he was in the back office in preparation for his deployment, as well as referring to a, quote, book/folder of tried and tested best practices, end quote. He was visited by SDS managers before he formally joined. They spoke to him and his wife about the nature of the work, including the risks associated with, quote, flesh pots, end quote, females. HN67's cover address was in Brixton, and he arranged it himself through a letting agency. He used a van as his cover vehicle, and his cover employment was as a kitchen fitter. He stated that the bi-weekly meetings at the SDS safe houses were, quote, an open discussion in order that all undercover officers knew what was happening and could then have an input into deployments, end quote. He stated that he would hand his intelligence reports in at these meetings. HN67 stated that he would attend the weekly Brixton SWP branch meetings, at which there would be a political lecture and briefings on upcoming events. Members would then go to the pub and discuss the allocation of tasks. So there is a thorough review of HN67's reporting included in the annex to Counsel for the Inquiry's written opening. But in short, it reveals the following. HN67 reported on the routine business of the Brixton branch of the SWP. That branch was at times known as the Lambeth and Croydon SWP. He reported on political discussions as well as practical arrangements for paper sales and other group activities. He reported on plans to engage in fly posting in solidarity with striking health workers, to register opposition at Labour Party conferences, and to demonstrate against the police bill at Brockwell Park in January 1984. HN67 reported in February 1983 that he had been elected to the committee of Brixton SWP, and in May he chaired a meeting. In July 1983, he took over as paper sales organiser, and in August he held the positions of assistant paper sales organiser and representative for Tulse West Norwood and Streatham. He resigned those positions in November 1983 and was moved by the SWP to the Croydon branch in February 1984. It is asserted in the risk assessment, sir, that HN67 was the, quote, treasurer of the SWP, end quote. But this is not borne out by a review of the contemporaneous documents, and it is not an assertion repeated elsewhere. HN67 reported consistently that the directions to members of Brixton and Croydon branches of the SWP was to withdraw in the face of physical confrontation by the National Front at paper sales. HN67 also reported on what he described as, quote, entirely peaceful, end quote, demonstrations organised by the Streatham Group of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, CND. As his deployment progressed, HN67 began to report more frequently on the SWP as a national organisation. He reported on a demonstration in Warrington on the back of a, quote, national call-out, end quote, at which disturbances were reported, and he attended the annual Skegness Easter Rally in 1983, 84 and 85. In 1985, the National SWP relocated its print shop and headquarters to Oval. On the 30th of August of that year, HN67 provided a sketch plan for the new building. On the 3rd of September, he met with managers and the security service to discuss the new building, and they provisionally agreed to meet again. On the 6th of September, HN67 provided a further sketch plan, and additionally, sir, on the 11th of September, he met again with the security service. On the 8th of October, he submitted further plans, details of the electrical and computer setup, intended occupants of offices, locks and access arrangements, and the details of contractors being used to install equipment and alarms. The security service appears to have been kept informed of HN67's deployment throughout, submitting requests for HN67 to identify individuals and provide information about their activities. A meeting between the security service and SDS managers on the 24th of September 1984 included a discussion of the merits of HN67 reporting on Brixton SWP rather than Croydon SWP. In addition, in May 1985, the security service appears to have warned the SDS about a possible compromise to HN67. He was debriefed by the security service at the end of his deployment. Throughout HN67's deployment, he reported on individuals' personal details, including employment, family heritage, pregnancy, sexual relationships, and sexuality. HN67, sir, used inappropriate terms to describe ethnicity, and he reported on the activities of children in connection with the SWP. In addition, he reported on members of the Brixton and Croydon branches of the SWP who were employed by public bodies and on trade union connections. So moving away from the summary of his reporting, the risk assessment from 2017 records that in order to effect his exfiltration, HN67 told his SWP branch that he owed too much tax and it was time for him to move on. His withdrawal appears to have proceeded without complication. Contemporaneous documents reveal that on the 20th of December 1983, HN67 was involved in a road traffic collision whilst driving his cover vehicle. He reported the incident to his insurer in his cover identity. Sir, HN67 has admitted that whilst in his cover identity, he engaged in a, quote, one-night stand, end quote, with a woman during the course of his deployment. There is a separate allegation that HN67 fathered a child to a member of his target group, which HN67 has denied. On the 20th of February 2013, HN67 was visited by police officers attached to Operation Hearn to take an account from him, which is recorded in notes of that meeting. HN67 is recorded as stating that he was warned by SDS managers that he could be tempted by, quote, flesh pots, end quote, females. He stated that he, quote, kept himself aloof and tried to keep his distance, end quote, and that there was no talk of sexual relationships with activists in the office. On the 16th of March 2015, an officer from Operation Hearn spoke with HN67 on the phone about a rumour that HN67 had had a relationship with an activist and fathered a child during his deployment. HN67 denied the rumour, but he did say this, quote, "I did have a one-night stand about a year before I left the field, but that was it," end quote. He later stated that he could not recall the name of the woman. He said that he had given her and others a lift home after a, quote, "week-long educational meeting at the University of London," end quote, and that she asked him in for a drink, and he, quote, "ended up staying the night," end quote. HN67 stated that he was not on duty at the time, and that to his knowledge, the encounter did not result in pregnancy. In addition, sir, the risk assessment records that HN67 stated that he reported this encounter to Detective Inspector Mike Barber, and that the incident was recorded. So officers from Operation Hearn spoke to HN19, cover name Malcolm Shearing, from whom we'll be hearing tomorrow, about HN67 on the 8th of August 2018. HN19 disclosed that he had a reasonable supposition that HN67 was in a relationship with someone from HN67's target group, and that he had fathered her child. HN19 has provided a witness statement to the inquiry. He states that he encountered HN67 by chance during his deployment, whilst they were both deployed, that is, and noticed a woman with a distinctive voice in HN67's target group. Sometime later, HN19 and HN67 went to a pub together, socially, and HN67 told HN19 that he had fathered that woman's child. HN19 later saw the woman with a small baby. The two officers spoke again, during which conversation HN67 gave HN19 the impression that he had fathered that same child. HN19 recalls that HN83 made a comment that seemed to confirm he was aware that HN67 had fathered a child whilst deployed. HN19 assumed it was known to more than just the three of them. Sir HN83, who has real name and cover name anonymity, has provided a witness statement to the inquiry in which he denies any knowledge of these matters. He states that he would see HN67 at the bi-weekly meeting whilst their deployments overlapped, and that they would sometimes meet socially. And I quote, "I would not describe our relationship as close, but we were friends," end quote. HN83 states that the topic of sexual relationships never came up between them, and that if he had become privy to such information, he would have, quote, "had a quiet word with management," end quote. HN83 states that he believes he became aware through the inquiry risk assessment process about the allegation that HN67 had a sexual relationship whilst deployed, but he knew nothing about HN67 fathering a child. HN83 was still in contact with HN67 as of November 2018. HN83 adds that he was shocked to read in the press about Bob Lambert, who we know otherwise as HN10, having fathered a child, and is, quote, "positive," end quote, that those revelations about Bob Lambert would have triggered a memory about HN67 if he had ever been aware of the allegation. In 2002, sir, HN67 appeared in the True Spies documentary using the pseudonym Richard, in which he discussed a product contamination threat to Lucozade, said to have been reported by John Dines, also known as HN5. HN67 was John Dines' manager in the SDS at the time when the Lucozade threat was reported on. HN67 has stated that he became aware that John Dines was, quote, "involved in a relationship," end quote, with Helen Steele before he returned to the SDS as a manager, and that he approached John Dines to voice concern. However, HN67 did not take the matter any further with police management, owing to his close friendship with Mr. Dines. So that concludes the summary of HN67's evidence.
Thank you. We are now going to hear the live evidence of Michael Chant.
Just repeat after me.
Okay.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
The
and
whole-
nothing but the truth.
the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Let's take a seat.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, Mr. Chant.
Good morning.
Could we start by having your full name, please?
My full name is Michael Harold Chant.
My name is Afra Bruce Jones, and I'm going to be asking you some questions on behalf of counsel to the inquiry. Can I ask that document UCPI 36660 is brought up on the screen? Sir, that's A1 of your bundle. Mr. Chant, is it correct that you provided the inquiry with a witness statement dated the 19th of January 2024?
That's correct.
Can we move to page 56 of that document? Thank you. Can you confirm that that is your signature, Mr. Chant?
Yes, I can confirm that.
And is this statement true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
Thank you, Mr. Chant. All of your witness statement is now in evidence and will be considered by the chair alongside the oral evidence that you give today.
Okay.
Mr. Chant, is it correct that you are currently the General Secretary of the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain Marxist-Leninist?
That's correct.
If you don't mind, I'm going to refer to the group as the RCPB-ML throughout these questions.
That's
if
good,
all right.
yeah.
When did you become the General Secretary?
Well, actually, there's a question of leadership of the party. We haven't always had a general secretary. And from our third Congress of the party, which was in 1999, I increasingly took up leadership duties. So it was formally consolidated that I should be General Secretary in a subsequent period. And it's actually in the record when that was. My recollection is that it was around 2005, something like that.
Thank you. Would it be fair to say that you became involved in the politics of the RCPBML as a young graduate who'd moved to London, I think as a composer, to meet and work with a man named Cornelius Cardew?
Yes, that's right.
And I think it was through Mr. Cardew's experimental music class at Morley College in the late 60s and early 70s that a group called the Scratch Orchestra was formed.
Yes. The Scratch Orchestra is famous or infamous for its experimental music. It was groundbreaking for its time.
And were you a member of the Scratch Orchestra?
Yes, anyone who turned up was a member.
And is it right that the Scratch Orchestra joined with the English communist movement Marxist-Leninist around 1971?
Not strictly. There was no joining of the two organisations. Members of the Scratch Orchestra became aware of English communist movement Marxist-Leninist through its experience of, I mean, it's covered, I think, but it had a tour of. It was based on taking music to village halls, and it took its music to the northeast, supported by funding from Arts Council of England, as it was then, and this coincided with certain orchestra members having come into contact with the English communist movement. So there was no formal joining. It's just that quite a large proportion of the scratch orchestra became interested in the communist movement, English communist movement, Marxist-Leninist, and that, in fact, the majority of the active scratch orchestra musicians became very political at that time. We're talking about 1971.
And do you include yourself as one of those members who became very political at that time?
Yes, I believe I was quite slow in gravitating towards the politics. But once I had done, then I remained pretty stalwart.
You have set out in your witness statement at section 1 a very clear chronology and explanation of your movement into the English Communist League. But can I ask firstly, is it correct that you became involved in the Communist Party of England, Marxist-Leninist, in 1973?
Yes, as quite an activist in 73. In 72, I think I'd attended meetings and so on and become interested. There was the activities, which I think I mentioned, of the Progressive Intellectuals Study Group, which was a really exciting discussion group. And so it was 1973, I think, when I became what you'd call an activist of the party.
And at that time, that group was called the Communist Party of England Marxist-Leninist. Is it correct that in 1979, the group that we refer to today, the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain Marxist-Leninist, came into existence?
Yes, it was, we say that RCPBML was founded in 1979. It was like a continuation of Communist Party of England, Marxist-Leninist. So there was a conference on March 16th, 1979, in which RCPBML was founded.
At the risk of oversimplifying the politics and the history of it, is it correct that when you were involved in the Communist Party of England, Marxist-Leninist, in 73, the party was based on Mao Zedong thought alongside Marxist-Leninism, and that you would have been considered Maoists to those engaged in the movement at that time?
Yes, I mean, that is a quite accurate assessment. We did, like the way you put it, that it was based on Mao Zedong thought alongside Marxism-Leninism is the way we would characterize it. I mean, it's worth noting that I think that like the activities of the party were not really to go around saying everyone should follow Mao Zedong thought. It was taking up issues such as the national liberation struggle in Ireland, various Afro-Asian solidarity campaigns, and so on. Yeah.
Thank you. When the party became the RCPBML, was there a change in the thought? Were you still following the Mao Zedong thought with Marxist-Leninism, or was there a change in that?
It dates to before then, actually. I recall from some of the disclosures, I think, that I believe there's one on subversion, which referred to Marxism, Leninism, the groups formerly known as Maoist were now known as Marxist-Leninist. And I don't think that's quite accurate in the sense that it kind of suggests that there was that continuity, whereas we were kind of aware of some of the issues of Mao Zedong thought, which didn't really coincide with our thinking and how we saw Marxism-Leninism. So that is, you could say, dating from 1978, so it's before the founding of RCPBML.
Thank you, that's helpful. Can we bring up the document again, UCPI 36660, it's your statement, Mr. Chant, and can we go to paragraph 2.14? Sorry, should have got a page reference for you there. Thank you. So, paragraph 2.14, Mr. Chant, I'll just read. You describe here, I think, the aims of the RCPBML. At its formation, the RCPBML saw its aims as building an organisation that would be for and part of the working class and oppressed people's movement for revolutionary change and the socialist transformation of society. The RCPBML had a membership and form consistent with the Leninist principles of a party of a new type. Could you just explain for us what that last sentence meant in terms of what the membership and form of the RCPBML would look like?
Yes, at that time, I mean, first of all, I think one has to remember that this was a period when, I mean, there was a lot of political activity. When one could say that the revolutionary movement was kind of recognized, and so the old parties, which have changed over time, it has to be said, in terms of how they engage with their membership and whether membership decides everything. So it was important to us to reaffirm that it was what Lenin had said, that in this overall era of what we would say was the era of imperialism and the proletarian revolution, that a genuine Marxist-Leninist party, as we insisted on at the time, should follow that those Leninist principles. So that means that it's a party which had discipline, which had the involvement of its membership in decision-making, which was based on democratic centralism and so on. So I think that kind of covers what we were concerned with when at the founding conference of RCP-BML.
Thank you very much. Can we now please bring up document number MPS 0747710? And sir, this is at A2 of the HN19 bundle. The RCP-BML was infiltrated and reported on by undercover officer nominal HN19, cover name Malcolm Shearing. Do you remember Malcolm Shearing, Mr. Chant?
Yes, I do, yes.
Can you tell us what sort of role, if any, did he have in the RCP-BML?
He became quite an activist, mainly in South London, and his reports tend to focus on South London. One can say unduly, in the sense of the party was a national party. It was particularly active in East London as well, for example. So he was very active in South London. He mentions Tom Graham as, I believe he uses the term, his mentor. So he was a protege in that sense of Tom Graham. He joined the work of mainly selling the paper Workers' Weekly, particularly as it was South London at Brixton Tube every week. Possibly there was also a program of pub selling. He might have been involved in that, but I can't be sure about that. Certainly he would sell the paper at Brixton Tube along with Tom Graham. But my recollection is that he didn't really join in the political discussion an awful lot. He was regarded as quite useful in the sense that he had a vehicle, and I think he mentions at some point that in effect it's like he became Tom Graham's driver. Tom Graham was one of the older comers in the party at that time, but he was. I mean, I can speak some more about Tom Graham because it comes up in HN19's witness statement also.
Perhaps you could just tell us, what was Tom Graham's role within the RCP-BML?
He was very much just an activist and very active in South London. His background was that he was born in Edinburgh in 1918. As a young teenager, he'd found his way to London. He tried to go to Spain in 1936 to participate in the International Brigade's struggle against Francoism and so on. But his trade was as a building worker. But at heart, he was also very much an author, and a lot of his activities in the party were along those lines. He would he wrote a number of plays, and some of the activists of the party participated in them. At the time we're talking about, I mean, it's quite interesting that in 1978, I think it was, when there was a by-election, Lambeth Central by-election, I think, and one of our comrades stood on the Democratic platform. His, Tom Graham's address was used as the election headquarters.
I see. So it'd be fair to say he was very active in the group.
Indeed, yeah.
And therefore HN19 Malcolm Shearing seemed to spend a lot of time with him.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
I want to take you to part of Malcolm Shearing's statement where he makes some comments about the reasons for his deployment into the RCPBML. Can I ask that we go to paragraph 57, which is at page 22. Thank you. So it's actually sort of the second half of that paragraph. I'll read out the section. He's talking about why he had decided to target the RCPBML. He says, the RCPBML was small and very extreme, used petrol bombs and had taken up allegiance with Albania. Without getting involved in political discussion, it seemed to be a very extreme organisation in their behaviour. If taken seriously, their plans for how to run British society were very extreme. Firstly, Mr. Chant, what do you say to the allegation, I guess, in this part of HN19 statements that the RCPBML had used petrol bombs?
It's not true, and there was there are some other parts of his statement as well, which kind of indicate that Tom Graham has suggested that the party had used petrol bombs in the past. He doesn't give any evidence for this apart from the hearsay. In fact, as I recall, he says that he had no idea what the context of this and what this referred to. Our view has always been that these kind of one could almost call them terrorist activities. This kind of violence we wouldn't engage in. It wasn't appropriate, and I think it might be said that like a couple of conversations with Tom Graham that he mentions in the pub after activities doesn't amount to evidence for that.
What about the second suggestion that the party had taken up allegiance with Albania? I mean, it's correct, I think, is it, that the party had aligned itself with Albania? And are you able to briefly explain why?
Yes, certainly. First of all, I would say that it's not really allegiance we're talking about, in the sense that we'd always, as a party, decided on our own path.
Yes.
There was, as part of our considerations, you could say, about fraternal relations with other parties, other countries, and so on, that we'd found that, well, first of all, this was our what we would call proletarian internationalism, to say that we fought on the same fronts for a new world, for, as we would have said then, for socialism and communism. In 1978, I believe it was, Enver Hoxha, who was leader of the Party of Labour of Albania, wrote a book which was very influential, called Imperialism and the Revolution, which took issue with certain concepts of what was known as Maoism or Mao Zedong thought, or the stand of the Communist Party of China. But it wasn't that, if you understand what I'm saying, it wasn't that we then said, oh, we are going to have our allegiance changed from China to Albania. The allegiance isn't the word we would have used.
I understand.
Does that explain
Yes.
it?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chant. Can we move, please, to paragraph 65, which is at page 24? A bit further up, sorry, it's not page, that's it, page 25. Just briefly read this bit. The justification for deploying into the RCPBML became clear to me initially as a result of my research into the group within Special Branch records. Although small in numbers, the Special Branch records indicated a track record of conspicuous violence on the streets and political extremism. Now, Mr. Chant, you've already explained that the suggestion in this statement that the RCPBML had used petrol bombs is untrue. What do you say to this suggestion that there was a track record of conspicuous violence on the streets?
Well, once again, I think what this is referring to was our stand on the promotion of neo-Nazi type organizations. And it was our stand that there was like a campaign to try and make such parties like the National Front into respectable, legitimate political parties. And I think, as I mentioned in the witness statement, I mean, it was 35 years, I think we said, after the defeat of the Nazis and the Japanese militarists, the Axis powers, in World War II. And I mean, it's interesting that one could say, looking at that history leading up to the formation and promotion of the National Front and similar organizations, that this issue of extremes had been really promoted as a way of looking at the world. That there was, I think we take issue with the fact that there's an extreme left and an extreme right as the motive for our existence, or the motive for opposing the National Front. It's much more what was happening in society, in the world, and particularly in politics in Britain at that time. So the question of extremism and violence on the streets. Yes, we took a stand that Nazis have no right to organize. But the battles that took place were going back to an earlier time, but 1974, when Red Lion Square took place, when the anti-fascist movement in general took a stand that the National Front should not be allowed to meet in Conway Hall. This was placing ourselves as a block to them doing so. And in confrontations, yes, I mean, in Red Lion Square, it was a student, Kevin Gately, that was killed. And I think it's fairly recognised it was by police truncheons. So I think that's, in terms of violence on the streets, that is what is being referred to. And it wasn't like, unlike some of the other organisations on the left, as they were called, just confrontation with the so-called extreme right, the far right, for its own sake. I hope that makes it clear.
Yes, thank you. The last thing I want to look at in this statement is just a bit further down in this paragraph. HN 19 says the following: the RCPBML's motivation was subversive in that they wanted to overthrow parliamentary democracy, establish a dictatorship of the proletariat, and so establish a one-party state. He does go on in that paragraph to say that towards the end of his deployment, it was his view that the RCPBML were diminishing, and therefore his deployment into the group wasn't the best use of resource. But just two things. Would you agree with the characterisation that the RCPBML wanted to overthrow parliamentary democracy?
Well, as I think I say in the witness statement, it's like the parliamentary democracy has kind of overthrown itself. Like going back to the sort of Leninist conception that we talked about earlier, I mean, it's useful kind of to bring that up to date, if you like, when there is a sense that the electorate, the people as a whole, are kind of disempowered from decision-making, from the influence on the political life of the country and so on, by the very fact of this parliamentary democracy. And it's not a sort of new concept. One can date it back to the English Civil Wars, the establishment of the Commonwealth under Cromwell, the debates, so-called Putney debates on the nature of democracy. So it's not some peculiar conception of RCPBML. The document, I'm not sure, like the authorization of the document, who its author is, I mean, on subversion. It kind of, HN 19's testimony is in line with that kind of definition, I think, of subversion. Dictatorship of the proletariat, yes, I mean, it's of its time also in like the late 1970s, the early 1980s, that we would keep emphasizing this necessity for capitalism to be transformed into socialism, and you have dictatorship of the proletariat. We wouldn't describe that process, that accomplishment in the same way these days. I mean, partly because the issue of dictatorship has other connotations, you know, especially after the 1930s with Hitler coming to power and so on. And the issue of a one-party state, this is HN19's interpretation. We never talked about a one-party state. In fact, our position became elaborated in what we term as the guiding principle of our party today, which is that of working for democratic renewal. In other words, it's a stand that it's not parties that should come to power as it is under parliamentary democracy. It is that people should be empowered to have political control, and such divisions as exist can be overcome if there are new forms developed in order to empower the people and for them to speak in their own name.
Thank you, Mr. Chant. That's very helpful. We'll move on to a new document. Can we please bring up UCPI 17236? So this is at tab B15. This is an intelligence report dated the 4th of March 1982, which reports on the first annual conference of the Campaign for Diplomatic Relations with Albania.
Yes.
I want to look specifically at paragraph 3. I'm afraid I will read it. I will read it out. The conference was chaired by Dafydd Wigley, Member of Parliament and President of Plaid Cymru. His brief introduction, including apologies for absence from William Wilson MP, was followed by a speech from Professor Privacy, Chairman of CDRA, who outlined the current situation in which the United Kingdom and Albania do not have diplomatic relations with each other. The gist of the problem is that, following an incident in a minefield in Albanian coastal water during which ships of the Royal Navy suffered casualties and damage, the Bank of England retains to this day a quantity of Albanian gold seized by the Allies for safekeeping during World War II. This unremarkable speech was followed by a similar effort from Stephen Calder, Secretary of CDRA, who laid more emphasis on the activities of the campaign, which had amounted to a small number of demonstrations and much writing of letters to newspapers. Finally, Privacy, Treasurer of CDRA, delivered what was little more than his personal vote of confidence for the efforts of the campaign. Can we now move to paragraph 5? This paragraph reads that the stated aims of the CDRA are ostensibly straightforward and stem from legitimate commercial and cultural aspirations. However, it is of interest that Stephen Calder is identical with Michael Chant, South London Regional Secretary of the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninist, and that approximately half of the persons remaining for the business part of the conference were current members of the party, or at least regular supporters of its meetings, in addition to Chant, Bland, 2 names redacted for privacy, another, and Tom Graham. Is it correct that Stephen Calder was an alias used by you?
That's correct, yes. It was like my persona within it was, overall it was known as the Albanian Society. The CDRA was a kind of campaign within the activities of the Albanian Society.
Was it common for those within the RCP-BML to adopt an alias or a persona?
It was quite common at that time, yes.
Can you tell us why?
Yes, it was a question of security concerns. In adopting what were known as party names, we had the conception of guarding our identities from the state and not from the people, we were working with politically. And one of the reasons it kind of faded away was we really realized that the state would know our identities anyway, as has been proved after all this time. And it is quite interesting that our suspicions at that time are sort of corroborated after all this period, which is quite interesting. But anyway, and that also the fact that generally speaking, the activists, the ordinary people we were working with, simply knew our party names, our aliases. So it didn't really achieve its objective. Nevertheless, I'm not aware of kind of anyone else that had such a developed alter ego, if you like, a profile as myself in the Albanian society. That was the it wasn't the fact that I was trying to conceal my allegiance or my involvement with RCP-BML. In fact, that was known. It's developed over time that I would become very active within the Albanian society. While we're on the subject, perhaps I could mention also Tom Graham, who was widely known as John Mahag, and actually HN19 never mentions that name, but Tom was widely known as John Mahag because that was his pen name. It was a nom de plume. And I can't remember what I mentioned, but anyway, he retired as a building worker in 1955, actually to devote himself to writing, and it was roughly the same time as he came into contact with the party. So everyone knew him as John Mahag.
I see. So there were other members of the party who also used party names or alternative personas in their work with the party.
Yes, yes.
Mr. Chant, I want to ask you now a bit more about the organisation of the RCP-BML. I'm going to ask to bring up your witness statement again. That's UCPI 36660, Sarah A1. And go, please, to page 38, paragraph 12.6, Roman numeral 1. Oh yes, so it's the 12.6 Roman numeral, the Roman numeral 1 that comes after 12.6, if that makes sense. Begins, this is what you've written, Mr. Chant. RCP-BML is a democratic centralist organisation. I think you mentioned that at the start of your evidence. Democratic centralism is an organisational method applied by the Bolsheviks. In a nutshell, it effectively means democracy in discussion, centralism in action, within a strategy of building a campaign and the party. There cannot be democratic centralism without dealing with the line of the party. And at paragraph Roman numeral 2, put simply, as a party, we discuss campaigns, strategy and tactics, and then after the maximum discussion, a decision is made, and the members follow that decision and campaign accordingly. Democratic centralism ensures the unity of the party and the full participation of its members. Can we now bring up a separate document, URN MPS 0729245, which, sir, is at tab B32. And we just scroll down to, this is an intelligence report dated the 17th of August 1982, and it's described as a review of some aspects of the RCPBML. I want to go to paragraph 3 specifically. Well, 3, and then I will move on. The RCPBML's recently published draft constitution demonstrates that in order to achieve the above aim, it's attempted to model itself from overall strategy to everyday terminology on the Russian Bolshevik Party. To the impartial observer, any comparison between the Russia of 1917 and present-day Britain may appear absurd, but whatever the incongruities, the RCPBML recognises essential similarities. Paragraph 4, one such perceived similarity is the belief in the ability of a small, highly disciplined organisation faced with the reality or the prospect of illegality to act decisively at the right time to change the course of a nation. Faint hearts who remain unconvinced by the Russian example are referred to the original 15 Albanian eagles who developed into the early 200-strong nucleus of the Communist Party of Albania. Compared with those 200, the RCPBML is said to be quite large. And we just go to paragraph 5. From their total conviction of the correctness of the historical analysis and from the anticipated persecution by the existing capitalist state, it naturally follows that comrades feel vulnerable and are highly security conscious. In practice, their fears are translated into a strict need-to-know policy, which conveniently complements the professed principles of democratic centralism, wherein central control all but totally excludes any element of genuine democracy. Thus, it is considered unnecessary and undesirable for the public, supporters, and even the mass of ordinary party members to know the identities of leading comrades or particular details of the party machinery. Meetings, which are open to the public, seldom attract participants from beyond the familiar circle of members, supporters, and contacts, but nevertheless it is understood that there are certain comrades who, to avoid the risk of exposure, seldom, if ever, attend such meetings. Mr. Chant, just that assertion at paragraph 5 that it is considered unnecessary and undesirable for the public, supporters or ordinary party members to know the identities of leading comrades or particular details of the party machinery. Would you say that's accurate?
Not really. As I've sort of mentioned in connection with party names, it was never any intention to keep our identity from supporters and, as it says, the mass of ordinary party members. These were security concerns, and if I may comment on that, those previous statements in the witness statement about democratic centralism. I mean, the tone is kind of meant to be quite conversational in that witness statement. In particular, my witness statement often talks about campaigns. I think that, like just focusing, as it were, on those two extracts on democratic centralism, it's not entirely appropriate to talk about campaigns as such. As I mean, whether or not one would agree with our party or not, it had a vision and still has a vision for a different type of world. So campaigns, yes, but it's not that we ever stood aside, as it were, from the people and thought, well, this is a campaign we should be involved in. Like in 1981, when we held the conference against racism and fascism in Conway Hall, as it happens, the hall was full. The fact is that we were part of the people's movement against racism and fascism, and the fact that so many people would come to a conference that the party had organised, I think proves that. Could I also just mention one other thing while I remember, which is on this question of violence or terrorism or I've just remembered something else, which I meant to say in connection with Tom Graham, if I may, which is that I think I began to talk about the 1978 Lambeth by-election,
Yes.
where we used Tom Graham's address as the base for the party. In fact, in the middle of that campaign, there was a fire precisely at that address. Well, it wasn't just Tom Graham that had to be rehoused. There were a number of people living in that house, and so it was very dangerous. And our supposition was always that it was an act of the neo-Nazis to attack our party. The other connected, which is why I remembered it, the other connected point about the campaigns against racism was that we were part of the ordinary resistance. Like it's really important that the people are only too willing to resist. Our slogan was "Self-defense is the only way." There were many people in East London, which is dealt with in an earlier tranche, but that were part of this movement of self-defense. And I noticed in looking through HN19's submissions that I think it's there, that he includes a publication of the East London People's Front, which specifically has an article against terrorism and terrorist activities. Specifically, there were organisations suggested that they should set up vigilante groups against racists who were conducting racist attacks. We never agreed with this. We always said that it's the people who need to be mobilised.
Thank you. And just back to this document, Mr. Chant, from your helpful explanation, would it be fair to say that you often held meetings, like, for example, the conference you just referred to at Conway Hall, which were open to the public and attracted many members of the public, not just members of the party?
That's correct. I mean, not just meetings like that, but and HN19 refers to this sports and cultural festival in the sports events of which were held in Coventry, where many thousands of people participated, and there were local sports and cultural festivals also. We held a big cultural side of the festival in St Pancras Town Hall.
Yes, I think I will ask you some questions about that later,
Okay,
actually. Yes,
sorry.
I think we
Right.
will come on to that. Just continuing with this briefly, I read earlier paragraph 4 where HN19 draws what he says is a similarity between the RCP-BML and the Russian Bolshevik Party, the belief of ability of a small, highly disciplined organisation faced with the reality or prospect of illegality to act decisively at the right time to change the course of a nation. Would you agree that that is a correct characterisation of the RCP-BML beliefs?
Well, I think I say somewhere that it's not. Anyway, I'm saying it now that wasn't really a question of beliefs in that sense. We would say now that the October Revolution in Russia was a crucial event. It opened the way for the world's first worker state and so on. And Lenin said, now we proceed to build socialism. So yes, we took heart from that, and also the example of Albania. But I think it's worth saying here also that I'm sure there's an implication somewhere in the documents that it shows that the party was committed to violence, if you like. But it doesn't even really deal with the situation in 1917.
So if we refer to the specific words where it says that the circumstances where the party may have to act decisively at the right time to change the course of a nation, what would that decisive action look like? Are you saying that decisive action would not be something violent?
Well, we're looking at the situation of the party at that time and the world revolutionary movement at that time. The Leninist position was that for a revolution to occur, you have to have a crisis, and the fact that the ruling class, the ruling elite, whoever that is at the time, couldn't rule in the old way. So the party steps in, and in 1917 it was the fact that Russia was part of the First World War. We withdrew from that slaughter after the Bolshevik Revolution. So it's that type of important political intervention that's the crucial aspect. With the Bolshevik Revolution, it was the slogan of land, peace, and bread that was decisive. Now we wouldn't necessarily pose the question, I think, or the answer in the same way, in that we point out that the present political system is undemocratic in the sense that the people have no voice of their own in running the country, and I think part of the party acting decisively today we could characterize as formulating this conception of the necessity for new forms. As I said before, we very much focus on the necessity for democratic renewal. We don't necessarily say we have a revolution and establish socialism. It's the people's empowerment that is key.
And I appreciate that that's how you would explain it today, but in the period of time of this document in the early 1980s, would you say it was broadly a similar idea?
Well, as I say in the witness statement, I believe that you're looking at the prospect of illegality, and like it was, I don't know whether it remains a distinct possibility. I think we give the example of Chile in that. That it may be necessary, if the party is declared illegal. I mean, there are other ways of undermining the party, but it's envisaging that situation where actually it's not us that declares we're illegal, it's what happens from the state's point of view.
Thank you, Mr. Chant, that's very helpful. Sir, I wonder if now would be a convenient time for a break.
I think the transcriber definitely needs a break. We've lasted an hour and 3/4, and we will adjourn for 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chant, I'm going to move on to a different topic now. I'm going to refer you to your witness statement again, so please can we have UCPI 36660 and at page, I think, 46, paragraph 13.1. Yes, this page. This page you are talking, you're dealing with HN19, Malcolm Shearing. But I specifically want to look at paragraph 4 and 5. Just the one above. Thank you, sorry. 4 and 5, yes. You say this. I recall that you're talking about the RCPVML, organised, along with others on the left, a counter-protest against a one-person march by Martin Webster, a leader of the National Front. The march was heavily protected by the police. It was effectively a stunt by Webster to draw attention to the National Front. I recall that the undercover officer Malcolm Shearing provocatively suggested an attempt to break through police lines to confront National Front leader Martin Webster. Had we followed this strategy, we would have been brutally assaulted by the police. Those who remember think that this was out of character of Shearing, and his suggestion was not taken up. We considered the suggestion adventurous, and it did not have any serious aim to it. Just very briefly to explore this, do you recall how many individuals were taking part in this counter-protest?
It's very difficult to be sure after this period of time. I would say, because it was I believe it was a fairly local event, so maybe a couple of thousand or 5 or 10,000, that kind of number.
And how about the members of the RCPBML? Were you all together, and do you remember roughly how many there were?
No, I don't remember. I mean, one reason for recalling the occasion at all, actually, is because of Malcolm Shearing's remark. It's about the only conversation, if you can call it that I recall having with him. I mean, there must have been others over the course of a couple of years, but it has stuck with me. Been shown that the reaction that it was a provocative suggestion is underlined. Yeah.
Do you know how many people heard this? Was this a conversation that you had one-on-one with Malcolm
Yeah,
Shearing?
it was just one-on-one, yes.
And you say you considered, was this really a serious suggestion? Do you think it was really a serious suggestion? Was it a throwaway comment? What was your impression of it?
Well, my impression was it was meant seriously. You know, it was meant as an option for me to, and whoever was there to take up. Wasn't serious in the sense that it was obviously not a feasible, practicable proposal.
You say not feasible. Is it correct to assume that Martin Webster, the leader of the National Front, was surrounded by a large number of police officers on this occasion?
Sorry, yeah, that's why. Yes, yeah, and I mean, my memory may be faulty. I can't, I haven't been able necessarily to find a reference to this precise demonstration. My recollection that it was in the Kennington area, but that may be faulty. It's just I have this particular recollection of Malcolm Shearing, and I have a kind of mental picture of the situation when he mentioned it, with so many police officers around. I think it was simply Martin Webster on his own, but I may be wrong on that.
Thank you. We move on to a different document, still on the question of violence, as we've discussed earlier. You talked about the RCPBML having a slogan in reference to anti-fascist self-defence is the only way. Can I turn up document UCPI 18237, which is at tab B22, sir? This is an intelligence report dated the 4th of June 1982, reporting on plans for protest activities concerning the visit to Britain of President Ronald Reagan in June 82. And I just want to look at paragraph 4. I'll just read the paragraph. Attendance is by party members and supporters of recent demonstrations, the May Day March, Bobby Sands Memorial, and the Ad Hoc Committee for Peace in the Falklands, indicate that a maximum of 40 persons may be expected at any one event. Since the heady days of the party's forerunner organisation, the Communist Party of England, Marxist-Leninists, there have been few instances of involvement in overt violence and practices such as assaulting overly inquisitive photographers. However, the official line regarding attacks by fascists, which in this context includes police officers acting as implements of state oppression, is that active, indeed preemptive, self-defence is obligatory. Linking of arms and similar passive tactics are considered as no better than running away. Now, Mr. Chant, you explained to us earlier about the party's position in terms of confronting or blocking neo-Nazis and their position as regards anti-fascist activity, and you have told us about the slogan of self-defence. But perhaps in just specifically with this document, is it correct that fascists, in the context which HN19 puts it, included police officers acting as implements of state oppression, and that preemptive self-defence being obligatory related also to police officers? Is that correct?
I don't recognise any of that really as party positions. I don't think I've seen that or been aware of that particular paragraph before. I think it gives a misleading impression of our stand. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to move on to the topic of front organisations. I say in quotes. I know that the term front is sometimes controversial. Can we turn up document UCPI 17057, which, sir, is at B1. This is an intelligence report dated the 5th of January 1981, reporting on a New Year celebration held by the party.
Can I just interrupt there, because the date is obviously not correct. It should be 1982. I noticed that before. It reports on something that happened in December 1981.
You're quite right. So it says that, yes, the event took place on the 31st of December 1981, so it follows that indeed the report should be dated the 5th of January 82. Yeah. Thank you. It says that this was a celebration, around 100 persons present, and at paragraph 3 goes on to list a number of groups which are associated with the RCPBML. Just briefly, at paragraph 3, Roman numeral 2, it lists the People's Democratic Front, the PDF, a broad-based anti-racist, anti-fascist organisation. At 3(3), the Preparatory Committee for a Revolutionary Women's Union of Britain. The paragraph below, for the Communist Youth Union of Britain. And then at small 5, other party organisations such as the Trade Union Revolutionary Opposition and the Health Workers Association. Paragraph 4 says the following: it's clear from the above that the party is continuing its policy of launching quasi-autonomous organisations to carry out its various projects, rather than forming committees or subdivisions within itself. By this simple ploy, it hopes to minimise the risk of exposing its internal structure, whilst attracting significant numbers of useful helpers who may not necessarily be potential party members, but whose suitability may be considered at leisure and at a distance. Inevitably, most active comrades combine party membership with participation in such organisations. For example, Michael Chant, alias Steve, is South London Regional Secretary of the party, Secretary of the Albanian Society, and a member of the PDF. A name redacted for privacy, alias Privacy, is a spokesman for the TURO and the HWA, and the current record holder appears to be Privacy, alias Privacy and Privacy, whose activities include the party, the Progressive Cultural Association, People's Democratic Front, the Health Workers Association, and the Revolutionary Women's Union of Britain. I am going to deal with some of these organisations shortly, but in general, would you say it's accurate to describe these organisations as quasi-autonomous of the RCPBML?
Well, it's not a term I think we ourselves would use. As I think I make clear somewhere, that these were mass organisations of the party in the sense that they represented various fronts of work, and in that sense they were united fronts or mass fronts. And so it's not that they were sort of underhand channels for recruitment to the party. I think that's the first thing to be said. So quasi-autonomous is a strange way of putting it. Certainly it's correct to say that they were inspired and initiated by the party, and RCPBML comrades were very active in them. But they had their programme. And it's fair to say, I think, that because of the death of two of our leading comrades, 1981 and 1983 respectively, and the fact that the 1980s were a period where the world was going through a change, which everyone can see now, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and so on. These organisations didn't continue in the form of whatever quasi-autonomous organisations, which doesn't mean to say that the party stopped organising on these fronts. But it concentrated on its own work, on its own activities, and so on.
I see.
Yeah.
So, what do you say about the suggestion made by 1819 that the reason for having the organisations was to conceal or minimise risk of exposing the internal structure of the RCPBML?
I think this is speculation on his part. It doesn't. It isn't borne out by the way the party and these organisations developed.
Thank you. Can we now move on to a document UCPI 16833, tab B9. UCPI 16833. This is an intelligence report dated the 11th of December 81. And the report refers to a number of events held over the weekend of the 5th to the 6th of December of 1981 by groups associated with the RCPBML, specifically the Preparatory Committee for a Revolutionary Women's Union in Britain, the Progressive Cultural Association and the People's Democratic Front. Can we look at paragraph 5, please?
Can I just say at that point that HN19 sort of continuously refers to the women's organisation as the Revolutionary Women's Union of Britain. It was simply known as Women's Union of Britain. Yeah.
Yes, I did note that point. I was going to ask you, just perhaps whilst we're on it, then in that case, Mr. Chant, was it the case that that organisation was always called the Women's Union of Britain? It never had revolutionary in its name?
That's correct.
And was that a conscious decision to not use the word revolutionary that you're aware of?
It must have been a conscious decision, but not from the point of view that I don't think, not to in my experience, that someone suggested it and it was overruled. It was always known as the Women's Union of Britain.
Thank you. So paragraph 5 of this document is referring to a concert which I think was organised by the Progressive Cultural Association. The evening concert, which was attended by about 150 persons, was a great success, the most remarkable feature being the wide scope of entertainment offered. The PCA gave a typical esoteric performance of revolutionary songs from Albania, but there were also more conventional items from National Interest Skiffle Group, John Tilbury, a pianist, the Hole in the Wall Gang, an Irish folk group, and a Rastafarian poet. This drastic departure from purely revolutionary culture was a deliberate attempt by the People's Democratic Front to present itself as something other than just the latest RCPBML front organisation, and it was clear that party hardliners had, through much soul-searching, convinced themselves of the necessity for such an apparent compromise. However, it is doubtful whether any, or many, or indeed any, outsiders were attracted to the concert. Would you say it is accurate that the choice of performers on that occasion were chosen deliberately to avoid presenting the PDF as just a front of the RCPBML?
No, I'd say that that's not correct. Actually, the Rastafarian poet referred to was Benjamin Zephaniah, who later became very well known and refused the Queen's honour. So no, these like clearly the party has also attracted progressive musicians, and it was so in those days. It still is the case. Excuse me.
Mr. Chant, these events that were held by the PCA or the PDF, was there any practical impact of these events? Did it encourage membership of the RCPBML, from your memory?
It's a strange way of putting it, in that it probably didn't cross our minds that this was an opportunity to recruit people to RCPBML.
So not
HN19 seems very concerned, and maybe the undercover officers were similarly minded in this, that there are front organisations which, seek to hide the actual force behind them, and it seems to me to be written from that point of view. And it's interesting the way he talks about departure from purely revolutionary culture, as though that was deliberately going in a different direction. No, the fact is we've the party is always had good relations with progressive musicians. There was, you could say, revolutionary culture, which was specifically, Cornelius Cardew himself wrote quite a number of songs which are clearly revolutionary, and the founding of the party and so on.
There's clearly a link between the party and music from the very outset.
But the point I'm making is that these, there were songs and music which were specifically for RCPBML and its circles. And then there's the wider progressive musicians. And this was, I remember the occasion because I'm pretty sure this was the last concert. It's December 1981, isn't it? Before Cornelius Cardew was killed in December 1981, yeah.
Can we move on to document UCPI 17190? This is at B13 of the bundle. Sorry, yes, UCPI 17190. It might be 17190-1. Yes, thank you. This is an intelligence report dated the 24th of February of 1982, which reports on another organisation, the Trade Union Revolutionary Opposition. If we go straight to paragraph 3, it's quite difficult to read, but I'm going to try. This organisation was formed by and consists mostly of members and supporters of the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninist. Its most conspicuous member, although not necessarily its most influential, is, I think that name is Stuart Munro. In typical RCPBML fashion, it claims to exist for the interest of the masses, but effectively excludes support by uncompromising extremism. For this reason, it is doubtful whether the TURO would be able, unaided, to mobilise sufficient support to pose a serious public order threat. However, the tenacity, personal plausibility, and known history of violence on the part of Munro and other RCPBML TURO members indicate a potential capacity for causing disturbances which cannot totally be disregarded. Firstly, Mr. Chant, were you yourself a member of the TURO at any point?
I don't believe so. These reports from HN19 always come at it from the point of view of whether these organisations are dominated by the party or not. And as I try to make clear in the witness report, this wasn't the way the party looked at them. They were organisations which, they were of their time, but it was like it still remains a task, for instance, to mobilise organised workers in the trade unions, to take progressive stands, and how the trade unions should act effectively. These are pressing problems. These are similar problems that trade union revolutionary opposition was trying to deal with in its day. And I take particularly exception to the way it poses this issue of whether trade union revolutionary opposition is large or effective enough to pose a serious public order threat, because this was never any objective either the party or these mass organisations. And it strikes me that indeed the question of public order had a, I mean, I say we've never been for fomenting public disorder or threatening public order in the way that these undercover police officers pose the question. Public order in very much in those days meant that things, had reached a certain stage in history. You had an authority which should be recognised, and opposition to this was a threat to public order. I don't think that was part of our thinking then or now.
Thank you. Next document I want to bring up, UCPI 5992. UCPI 15992, which is at B37. And this intelligence report dated the 10th of December of 1982. It's another report of a concert held by the PCA, but I want to take you specifically to paragraph 4, where HN19 reports, the only item of interest during the proceedings was an announcement that earlier in the day a National Front meeting in Gravesend had been broken up by a contingent of Hind Mazdoor Lahar, the RCPBNL's Asian Front organisation. Apologise if I have pronounced that incorrectly, but firstly, Mr. Chant, is it right that that organisation, Hind Mazdoor Lahar, was an Asian Front organisation of the RCPBNL? Would you have described it that way?
No, I wouldn't. Hind Mazdoor Lahar means Indian Workers' Association, as I recall. I know there were activists of the party who were active in HML, as we used to refer to it, in Mazdoor Lahar.
Would it have the same status as a group such as the PCA or the PDF in terms of its relation to the party?
I'm not sure that it would be correct to say that. To my recollection, I don't think it was set up in the same way on the initiative of RCPBML. Certainly, as I say, party comrades from Punjab and probably Pakistan were involved in it.
Thank you. Mr. Chant, we've talked about several of these front organisations, or these organisations related to the RCPBML. And you've said that it wasn't something that you would have particularly considered at the time, whether or not you would be able to recruit new members from these fronts. That wasn't, I think you said in evidence, that wasn't really the purpose of them. What do you say to the suggestion that the RCPBML used these front organisations to conceal the true number of its membership?
Conceal from whom? I mean, what will, if it's concealing the numbers from the state, I don't think these mass organisations would assist if it was concealing them from the public. See, I think from my grasp of what HN19 is saying, is that he tries to have it both ways. You know, when there's a meeting he goes to that has only a small number of people, he says the party is ineffective organisation, it's past its heyday, and so on and so forth. When you have events, meetings, cultural events, sports events where thousands of people turn up, he says, well, this must be a way of concealing the numbers of the party. It's not the way of looking at it. I mean, we've always, you know, whether it's understood or not, we've always regarded ourselves as at the forefront of the people's movement, you know, working to move history forward, if you like. And we've never agreed with this idea. It's mentioned in a footnote somewhere in the witness statement of the idea that this is now the end of history. We've reached the ultimate kind of society. So all these activities are part of, you know, building the new outlook, building the new organisations, the unity of the people, their determination to move from the old to the new. What is could call a modern Enlightenment movement. I mean, we think of communism as the Enlightenment movement of our day, as you know, as opposed to the Scottish Enlightenment or that period. And I mean, I, speaking personally, of course, I was always very inspired by these activities, and it always kind of surprised me that figures like Malcolm Shearing were so cynical and dismissive of them, and thought it correct to. I mean, there are requests from the security service for names of musicians that, for instance, there's a case with the Albanian Society, I think, it was, asking HN19 to find out who this musician was that was interested in Albanian music. There's you know, the interest on whether I was moving house and whether that would interfere with the work of the Sports and Cultural Festival and so on. It's difficult to empathise with that mindset, and it's just one more example which shows how in the present this kind of interference in the political affairs of the people should be banished from the way the state works.
Thank you, Mr. Chant. Those are all the questions I have for you. Sir, it's 12:35.
Yes. We would normally have a break now to permit anyone who has questions which they wish to be put to approach you under Rule 10. I think that would be convenient now, would it not?
Yes, sir.
Is the full 15 minutes likely to be needed?
I think unlikely, sir.
If it isn't, then if those who have got questions can deal with it more rapidly than 15 minutes, we'll resume when they have.
Thank you. Sir, there are actually no further questions to put to Mr. Chant.
Yes. In that case, that concludes today's proceedings, and we will resume tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I say in a note of self-congratulation that for once one of my estimates has proved accurate. Mr. Chant, thank you very much for the assistance you've given the inquiry, and you are, of course, free to leave whenever you wish.
Thank you. It's been good to be able to give the evidence here.